I am truly delighted to welcome you this afternoon to Thomas Berry and the Great Work, honoring a truly great man whom I knew as a professor in graduate school, who became an academic guide, a friend, and the visionary who influenced so much of my life's work. Many here today can claim the same and other ties. He was born in North Carolina, a priest and a member of the Passionists, a religious congregation founded in the 18th century. He became a university professor and founder of a graduate program of religious studies, the director of a center, a writer, and a man with a great vision, stated succinctly in the title of his book, The Great Work, published in 1999 on the eve of the third millennium. In the concluding chapter, he wrote, "So now is in this transition period into the 21st century, we are experiencing a moment of grace, but a moment in its significance that is different from any previous moment." Then, after stating how we are altering the great classical civilizations and the indigenous tribal cultures that have dominated the spiritual and intellectual development of vast numbers of people, he declared that we will never be able to function without these traditions, but these older traditions alone cannot fulfill the needs of the moment. Something new is happening. A new vision and a new energy are coming into being. 10 years ago, in 2009, Father Thomas Berry passed away at the age of 94. In 10 days, on November 9th, will be the 105th anniversary of his birth. This year, our keynote speakers, Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm, have published Thomas Berry, a biography. Probably that's not any news to you right now. But let me introduce them. They have been my friends for these past 50 years. Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm are senior lecturers and research scholars at Yale University, where they have appointments in the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, as well as the Divinity School and the Department of Religious Studies. At Yale, they teach in the joint MA program in religion and ecology and direct the Forum on Religion and Ecology together. Mary Evelyn received her PhD from Columbia University in Japanese Confucianism. Since 1997, she has been a research associate at the Reischauer Institute of Japanese Studies at Harvard. Her Confucian publications include Moral and Spiritual Civilization in Japanese Neo-Confucianism, The Philosophy of Qi, and with Du Wei Ming, she has edited 2 volumes on Confucian spirituality. John Grimm received his PhD from Fordham University, writing a thesis on the shaman under the direction of Father Thomas Berry. He has undertaken field work with the Crow Apsaluka people of Montana and the Salish people of Washington State. He is the author of The Shaman, Patterns of Religious Healing Among the Ojibwe Indians. He also edited Indigenous Traditions and Ecology, The Interbeing of Cosmology and Community. Mary Evelyn also studied with Father Berry, receiving an MA in History of Religions before attending Columbia University for her doctorate. Concern for the growing environmental crisis, especially in Asia and among indigenous peoples, led them to organize a series of 10 conferences on world religions and ecology at the Center for the Study of World Religions at Harvard. They are series editors of the Harvard volumes from the conferences on religion and ecology. Along with Brian Thomas Swimme, Mary Evelyn and John created the multimedia Journey of the Universe project. This consists of an Emmy Award-winning film, a book from Yale University Press, 20 podcast interviews, and 3 online courses from Yale Coursera. Mary Evelyn and John were longtime collaborators with Thomas Berry. Over 35 years, they edited his essays and published his books, created the Berry Archive at Harvard, established the Thomas Berry Foundation, and led the American Teilhard Association, and wrote the biography, Thomas Berry, a biography, to which I have referred. They will be signing copies here at the reception after the proceedings this afternoon. And so, without any further wait, Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm.
Thank you so much, John. This friendship has blossomed, and to see so many friends here today from those Fordham years, Riverdale years, and beyond is really a great joy. And to see new faces is also splendid. I want to thank my brother, Peter, and sister-in-law for coming, and some friends from Trinity as well, where I graduated here in DC. You know, it's really tremendous that Georgetown has taken up this remarkable visionary, Thomas Berry, and we're very grateful for the support of President DeGioia, for the Berkley Center here, and for Sam Wagner's amazing work. But we want to give a special thanks to our friend.
I join with Mary Evelyn in my appreciation for your presence here. I want to lean on the Confucian tradition, how delightful it is when friends gather from afar. But both Mary Evelyn and I wanted to acknowledge and honor John Borelli, a friend, as John has said, for over 50 years, and especially for his leadership role here at Georgetown in organizing this conference, and as he has indicated, so many more. This friendship's extending for 50 years with Mary Ann, John's wife, and Mary Evelyn and myself, and many of us present here, is a delight to mark this moment and bring us into a community together.
We're going to make some remarks this afternoon about the book itself, about who was Thomas Berry. We're all still discovering that. And we want to highlight, of course, his notion of a new story and a communion of subjects. And then we want to end with the great work that so many of you here are involved with as well. I want to just also acknowledge our third author in the book, and that's Andrew Angel, who was a professor of literature at Elon College in North Carolina. And he did a lot of the research that helped us for the early years in Greensboro and with the Passionists. So we're grateful to Andrew.
After we had finished our graduate studies with Thomas Berry, we maintained that friendship by visiting often at Riverdale Center and also beginning to listen to Thomas developing his essay style and working with him, as many of us did here in the group, on ideas that he was developing, and eventually even driving with Thomas to talks together and participating in that process of struggle to get one's words together. And there were several moments, several times in those exchanges when the idea of a biography would come up. And there was one constant phrase that Thomas used whenever it would come up: tell my story in the context of my times. And if you think of it for a moment, his times are so rich. Thomas Berry's long life spanned the major events of the 20th century, from the First World War at the time of his birth to significant climate and ecological disruption, from electrical energy to solar energy, from community phone lines to computers, from horse and buggy to placing a man on the moon. He sought throughout his life to make sense of these changes. And I think that's my first emphasis here, is to try and catch the tail of this dragon, this wonderful person, Thomas Berry, the sense that he was engaged in a quest for his historical voice. I think that moves through his life, and it comes to this very moment here where we begin to think of biography as this triangulation, a historical genre that in Thomas Berry's case brings together the context of his times, Thomas's quest for his historical voice, and the efforts of two of his students to try and understand and interpret this journey.
This was a 10-year project and longer, because this is one of the most remarkable intellectuals in the 20th century. And in fact, that was recognized by Harvard when they established with us his archives there, because those archives are recognizing the leading thinkers of the 20th century in the environment. It's a remarkable tribute, actually. And so what helped us in this biography was many of the papers that we had boxed and collected when we took apart the Riverdale Center. We sent them down to Margaret Berry, his sister in North Carolina, and God bless her, she organized them and sent them back up to Harvard. And so papers that were published and not published, letters from all over the world. This was way before emails, and these letters are so extraordinary. People asking him for things, him writing for things, and so on. So you got this sense already of a planetary person just through those letters. But what was particularly helpful was an autobiography that he wrote at the end of his life. It's not a publishable manuscript, really, but we took some central passages. It's called Goldenrod, and it gives this sense of his life, especially early in Greensboro, when he's recalling at the end of his life the powerful impact of nature on him. That beautiful story of the meadow across the creek. All of this visionary, mystical sense of the impact of presence in nature. And yet, at the same time, he felt the sense of loss with the rapid industrialization in the South, with the growth towards modernization. This small community, 30,000, it's well over 300,000 now, but he could feel there's loss here. And as well, he was very aware of the inequities in the society where he grew up. His father was very conscious of African Americans, and in his company tried to take care of them. We visited the African American Museum this morning, and it is riveting, as you know. Thomas was immersed in this history. He understood it. And so between the love of nature, between the loss, between the inequities, his historical vision began to emerge. And in fact, it had a special role right here in Washington, D.C., where he took up his graduate studies. He was at Catholic University, and there he studied history, Western history. He had wonderful scholars, especially a few who had come from Europe at the time. And at that time at Catholic University, he studied the philosophy of history of Vico, and that was his dissertation. It's quite a work, but in addition, there were classes even then on indigenous traditions, which was really remarkable. I should mention, he has come out of Greensboro, North Carolina, 14 years there as a young person, 14 years there at the end of his life. He struggled. He went away to high school trying to get this vision, even as a young person. At 18, he entered the Passionist order, and we're so pleased that there's a number of Passionists here today with us, because he wanted to find a place where he could have solace, where he could have silence, where he could have reflection, and a religious context. And the Passionists have both a monastic and a preaching context. This was the right place for him. And his graduate studies were supported, his life was supported by the Passionists. After he finished his graduate work in 1948, he took off for China. Now, an amazing, in 48, to be thinking about the traditions of China, the history, the language, he was already studying it, the religious traditions and thought, Confucianism. That's why I immersed myself in Confucianism, because of his brilliant understanding of this tradition, an extraordinary tradition, filled with cosmology and ecology, and he understood that so long ago. We were just in China, and we'll tell you about this at the end of the talk, but 70 years ago, he went there with Ted DeBerry, one of the great scholars of Asia at Columbia. Ted and Thomas met on the boat going out of the harbor in San Francisco. They spent a good deal of time in China, but Mao took over Beijing and they had to be evacuated. But this experience in China never left him. This love of this tradition. Ted DeBerry established one of the great Asian programs in North America at Columbia, and many years later, Thomas did that at Fordham University in the History of Religions program. But first, Europe intervenes.
When Thomas returned in 1948, it's interesting to reflect on the experiences that he had had, both those in the United States and on the boat over to China. They stopped in the Philippines so he could visit his sister, who was a Maryknoll sister there. And then after the 1948 leave-taking from China, he went to Japan and had occasion to meet with Joseph Spa, a scholar of Japanese Confucianism there, and to make contacts in the context of Japan. But his return in 1948, he returned to Dunkirk, the seminary of the Passionists, to teach in that setting. And I think he began to formulate the image of himself as a teacher and to make plans. And one of his plans was to return to East Asia, hopefully to Japan, and to work in those institutes there, or possibly in Korea. And he thought the Korean opportunity was through a chaplaincy in the Army. So when he went into volunteer for a chaplaincy in the Army, he was unexpectedly assigned to Germany. This was a real twist in his plans and his career, but Thomas made the most of it, and by making the most of it, I want to more than insinuate, but to say quite frankly that the military life did not intrigue him. It didn't interest him that much. He found it trivial and at times banal, but at the same time, he was very aware that a matter of a few kilometers away was the Soviet army, much larger than the American presence in West Germany, but in East Germany, the Soviet presence. So he was aware of the tensions in the historical context at that time. So he took the opportunity while he was in Europe to travel a bit and to deepen his understanding, for example, of Dante's Divine Comedy by traveling in Italy. He also had the occasion to be not simply a chaplain in the military, but he entered into local parish life in Germany. So it's interesting to see in the archives letters from German families who established a friendship with Thomas, and that friendship continued into the 50s and 60s. So these letters are very interesting to get an idea of, especially Thomas's appreciation of the aesthetic of local musical groups in Germany and their accomplished presentations. So the 1954 termination of his chaplaincy freed Thomas up, and on his return to the United States, he stopped in England and he met with the historian Christopher Dawson. Thomas would refer to this quite often when we would discuss history as a discipline, because that meeting with Dawson was seminal. It affirmed an idea that Thomas had and that Dawson was working on also. Namely, Dawson was a historian of the formation of Europe, and Dawson was keen on the role of Judaism and Christianity in the formation of Europe. And Thomas was given an affirmation by Dawson that religion played a central role in understanding cultural history. So when Thomas returned to the United States, even more now he began to see himself as a teacher. That role began to crystallize, and he applied to the superior of the Passionist order, but unfortunately, the Passionists and their preaching orientation did not have teaching universities or teaching colleges, and they declined, or they did not give him permission to teach, and he was a doorman instead in the Queens community of the Passionists community there near St. John's University. Eventually, Thomas pushed that request all the way to the Superior General in Rome, and eventually the Passionist Superior General in Rome recognized Thomas's capacities, gave that permission, and Thomas connected then with the establishment at Seton Hall University in New Jersey of a Far Eastern Institute. This was a remarkable moment in East Asian studies because many of the expatriates from the mainland through Taiwan had come into the United States, and Seton Hall was a center for Chinese thought. From Seton Hall, he was there 57 to 61 in the teaching capacity, and then he moved to St. John's with an appointment. And St. John's, its conservative administration ran up against a faculty who were really wrestling with academic freedom at the time. There was a strike, and Thomas attempted to mediate between that strike. It happened that the administration fired those faculty who had struck, and Thomas was included. It was a misreading of his role in those activities. Immediately, Christopher Mooney at Fordham University contacted Thomas and offered him a position at Fordham University to develop a history of religions program. So it was at Fordham that Thomas developed this program focused on the Western traditions, South Asian. Thomas was teaching himself Sanskrit, emphasizing his budding work in Buddhism especially, and then East Asian traditions, his love of those traditions also.
You know, it's quite remarkable when we think of what academia requires of us, but he had over 20 PhD students that he directed who went on to teach all over the country. That's an enormous contribution in and of itself. But what is also stunning, so this struggle to teach, but his persistence to do so, his struggle to write. It was during this period that he published one of the very early books on Buddhism that was a teachable book. Columbia University Press still has it in print. And the other book, that was 66, and the other book in 71 was Religions of India, a beautiful, beautiful book. So his insight into these traditions, I want to underscore, was very much self-taught. There were very few courses in universities across America and elsewhere, North America, on these traditions. So his ability to take texts and traditions and history and put them into something that we could all understand, and that was true in his classes, of course, at Fordham. Later, his style developed into these very pithy essays, as you know. And during the Riverdale years, he would write essay after essay. And many versions of this, of course, emerged. And especially when the computer emerged, there were lots of different versions of these essays, which was a challenge to edit them, as you can imagine. But out of these essays came Dream of the Earth in '88. Then 10 years later, the great work, as John Borelli has mentioned, Evening Thoughts, The Sacred Universe, and Christian Future and the Fate of Earth. We were stunned, by the way, when Columbia said we'd like to call this particular group of essays The Sacred Universe. We always took one of the essays for the title, but this was a secular press. That is a word that we need more than ever before today. Sacred universe. He was so far ahead of his times. Now, what we would try to do at Riverdale, at this astonishingly beautiful setting, across from the Palisades, these 200-million-year-old cliffs, the Hudson River with its estuary effect of the salt water coming in and the fresh water coming down from the Adirondacks, these beautiful, there were two actually huge red oaks there. He dedicated his first book, Dream of the Earth, to the red oak. But what we wanted to create, and out of the Teilhardian context, the Teilhard Association, we would have monthly meetings there every Saturday. And we'd have a talk. He would do the one in November, and we'd celebrate his birthday. We'd have a talk, and we'd have a potluck dinner. It was an amazing intellectual and friendship community that supported his working towards his historical vision. The struggle, the word, the community, all of that coming together, and all of these were necessary for him to do this great work. He would have summer conferences that he would do the whole 2 or 3 days on topics like the bioregionalism, on New York City, its history and its future, on the Hudson River Valley, and these were astonishing. People would come for miles and miles for these summer conferences. But in the middle of this 25-year period at Riverdale, and again, the Passionists gave him this house for his huge library, 10,000 books, for all of these gatherings and so on. It was from 1970 to 1995. In the middle of this special time at Riverdale was what he called his golden year. It was 77, 78, the year before we were married, and we had many wonderful evenings with him. But John will describe the year.
As Mary Evelyn mentioned, that was Thomas Berry's term for that year. I can still see him leaning back, and my goodness, that golden year. It was a term that described a period when 3 graduate students came to live at the center. There were also some Passionists living in this 4-story house. The 2nd and 3rd floors had rooms in them, and the students, Brian Brown, who's with us today, did his undergraduate at Fordham and came into that program, and Valerio Ortolani, an Italian Jesuit who had done studies in Japan and went to Mexico to continue eco-psychological work before his passing. The 3 of us constituted a small community, and then visitors would come and swell, and the meals were an especial focus of this golden year exchange. We would have noon meals from, say, about noon to 3, and dinners from 6 to 9. And of course, the agenda was for one of us to present what work we were doing on our dissertation, which was a perilous commitment, and Thomas would give us feedback, and more often than not, we would listen to him developing ideas that would find expression in his essays. So these were remarkable moments, and the crux of it all, I think, is going to be evident later when we hear Brian Brown read a poem that he wrote as he was leaving the center. And he will take us in his poem on a walk around the Riverdale Center. And if you listen closely, you'll hear the community, the expansion of Thomas's quest for his historical voice. We'll hear it extend into the scriptures of these traditions. Brian will talk about the books on the shelves and how the vitality of these scriptures that we students were looking at and trying to ponder the depth of these traditions. So it's in this year, 1977 to 78, that Thomas will articulate the essay, The New Story. And that new story is lays out Thomas's cosmological perspective, but he does so in this way, to just see it in 2 forms. He articulates a very old concern for the distancing from the natural world, the sense that he brought from his youth in North Carolina of this loss of connection with this orienting, grounding, nurturing, transforming exchange of humans with the natural world. And in our industrial technological turn, we distanced ourselves and continue to do so. We're still grappling with that. On the other hand, Thomas brought an insight into this sense of the evolutionary story, the evolutionary perspective, and a realization then that there was a telling, there was something going on, there was a new revelatory telling, and that would clarify itself in one phrase, especially for Thomas. He would say, the universe is not a collection of objects, but a communion of subjects. And you can hear in these 2 phrases, not a collection of objects. It's the distancing from the natural world has caused us to see the world as objectified dead matter that we can manipulate or treat in any way we want. But he says the turn we need to make is to understand this communion of subjects, this sense of the capacity of the world and its subjectivity, its ability to speak to us. And This brings me to 2 points that I think are really crucial in seeing Thomas's his vision articulate itself. His quest for historical voice expanded into the sense that every existent being in the universe had voice and was telling its story. So this remarkable understanding that he would express in his writings when he sought a way to be grounded in the great vessel of life, the cosmos, and evoke this with the power of story, which elevated the voices of bird song and migrations, revered the living forests and ancient mountains, evoked the roaring power of oceans and rivers, and wove it all together in a way that made one feel the power of starbirth or galaxy formation. If the voices of reality is the first point I would emphasize, the second is this power of the world in front. The capacity of the religious traditions, he felt, provided a frame for understanding this revelation. And there are so many words we could use for it from the traditions themselves, but one that Thomas found satisfying was sacred. It's a sacred universe. It's a sacred concert.
Clearly, at the ground of being for Thomas was this sense that we need a new story coming out of this golden year, beyond the old paradigms of religion and science as divided and so on, a new integration of indigenous and ancient religious wisdoms with the evolutionary sciences and the ecological sciences, a new fusion. This sense, then, the assumption for Thomas was that human beings have evolved into a planetary force capable of not only knowing, but also shaping the evolution of life at this particular time. His critique was that we still operate from this old world view of a mechanistic, a separate universe of humans and nature. And this leads us to destroy the ecosystems on which life thrives. The goal is that when we come to know the cooperative, connected, living universe, everything changes and our role emerges. And we are just getting a glimpse of what that means from his 1978 essay. For he would say that our role is in co-creating that which comes next that offers hope for a different and a vibrant future. That is the great work that he was calling us to. So we're going to conclude with kind of a bouquet of celebration of the great work that's in this room and beyond. I want to start with the Earth Charter, which was a 10-year effort to write with many, many people in committee a declaration not of independence, but of interdependence. It came out of the Rio Earth Summit in '92. Gorbachev said we need a 10 commandments for adjudicating the environment and development. This is still an ongoing clash of interests. So that charter tried to put together ecology, justice, and peace, but the context was Thomas. And the preamble of the Earth Charter says, and I was part of the drafting committee, we are part of a vast evolving universe. Earth, our home, is alive with a myriad community of life. That is a profound cosmological sensibility at the heart of this declaration of interdependence. I want to also give a shout out to the religious women across North America and in the UK and Ireland and in Australia, women who understood Thomas at a very profound level. Genesis Farm with Miriam McGillis over 30 years, Jean Clark at Earth Home on Long Island, the Green Mountain Monastery where Thomas is buried up in Vermont, Sisters of Earth, all across this country setting up Earth literacy centers, Jane Blewett and her Earth Center in Maryland, and a special shout out for Sister Megan Rice, a sister of the Holy Child, who's a close family friend and has done some of the most courageous work in peace movements and nuclear disarmament, and we thank her for that. In the world of education, we have people like Joe Holland at St. Thomas and Elizabeth Ferraro, who for many summers had Thomas over to Assisi to do conferences with young people and inspire them. The Humane Society of the U.S. had a special center for respective life and environment that Thomas served on. Rick Cludson and Lisa Bardick helped to lead that. The Teilhard Association that he was president of for 12 years, and we've been leading for about 32. We've got all kinds of Teilhardians here. Jane Ann McPartland, Maria Myers, Kathy Duffy, Catherine Ann Kropp, Dan Scheid, Frank Frost, who's doing a movie on Teilhard. Frank and Mary Frost. Religion and ecology, inspired by Thomas over and over again, and our colleagues Heather Eaton up at St. Paul's University in Ottawa, Reverend Nancy Wright in Burlington, Kusamita Peterson, a leader in the Parliament of World Religions, Gary Gardner and his work for many years with World Watch, and Rabbi Fred with the Interfaith Power and Light and the National Religious Partnership for the Environment. We're thrilled to have all of you here doing this great work. Herman Green down in North Carolina with the Center for Ecozoic Studies, his latest work is to collect examples of the great work and put them into a booklet. We have done that also on the Thomas Berry website, and you can see the inspiration that these organizations have created. Forgive me if I miss some of you here, but this sense that the community of the great work that is emerging will continue to inspire all of us into the future. So we're going to conclude with our offerings into the great work. Is this Forum on Religion and Ecology, now based at Yale, because our former dean said science and policy, economics, technology, and law are necessary but not sufficient for the environmental changes that we need. We need the moral force of all the world's religions right now. And Thomas was crucial both in teaching us the world religions and being present at our Harvard conferences for all of those 3 years.
John Borelli has mentioned the Harvard conferences, and so I won't go into depth other than to say that we held them from 96 through 99, and then 10 volumes resulted from the work of over 800 scholars who are examining particular traditions. So it's Judaism and ecology, Islam and ecology, Confucianism, and so forth. These conferences generally followed a threefold methodology. There was an effort to inquire where individuals or communities within these traditions had an exchange with the natural world that had entered into their scriptures or their rituals or their commentarial tradition, and so a retrieval dimension. Each of these conferences would bring forward examples from a particular tradition, and then the examination would take place of the assembled scholars from this tradition, a kind of re-evaluation. So retrieval, re-evaluation, and if the example seemed to have some gravity with regard to contemporary problems, how would a tradition reconstruct itself? So retrieval, re-evaluation, reconstruction was the basic drive behind this gathering. The volumes that emerged continue to be used, and we have a sense that the religions of the world now have so many voices, like the Parliament of World Religions, which has taken to the question of ecological concern significantly.
So we just want to give a couple examples of this on the ground, and I want to give a big shout out to Walt Grazer and Drew Christensen, who worked for many years, along with John Borelli, at the U.S. Bishops' Conference on these issues of the environment and the Catholic Church. The encyclical that's resulted from the work of many, many people, Laudato Si, on care for our common home. We have one of the most extraordinary religious leaders on this topic, as we know, Pope Francis. But I just want to highlight that this beautiful phrase in the encyclical, cry of the earth, cry of the poor, came from Leonardo Boff, from a book he did in '97 in a series we do at Orbis on ecology and justice. Leonardo, as you know, is one of the leading liberation theologians from Latin America, and years ago, Thomas Berry said to Leonardo Boff, "We can't liberate humans without the earth. Leonardo got this in a huge way. He's hugely into this sense of cosmology and ecology. So that theme is right there in the encyclical, and that thread comes from Thomas Berry's integral ecology, which he used that phrase many years ago. I just want to also highlight, people say, what's happening on the ground? And there is a lot happening. I was just on Cape Cod this past weekend in Chatham. 300 people gathered for a conference on religion and climate change, a call to action. It was astonishing. The largest gathering on the Cape on this issue of climate change. As you know, they had 2 typhoons in July. They have rising seas. They have lowering water tables, extinction of species, and so on. A huge article in the Boston Globe. The fire is here. The presence is right ahead of us. They had the head of the Woods Hole Institute. They had all the environmental groups on the Cape. They had 2 state senators and so on. And things are beginning to change, especially with this moral force. Because it's our conviction that just like civil rights really arose with the religious leadership of Christians and Jews, of Abraham Heschel, Martin Luther King, and so on, to says segregation, separate but equal, is not a moral position. New integration is needed, and that's the new integration we need with humans and the earth. The final things to share with you on the great work that's emerging is Journey of the Universe. We've just come back from China, and we just want to share 2 examples of what happened there with Journey of the Universe.
We are blessed in our life, of course, to work with younger students, and they lift us up and give us the capacity to find a way forward and a hopeful way forward. But sometimes the students do things that surprise even the 2 of us who've been around for a while. And we stopped at a new university in the city of Kunshan, about an hour outside of Shanghai, where Duke is involved in a collaborative academic adventure there. We have a colleague who teaches there, and he invited us to show Journey and then to meet with his class. About 10 days before we left, we had a firm idea of what we would do with the showing of Journey of the Universe, but we were unclear about the class. And in communication with James, he says, don't worry about that. The students are going to take care of it, and they're going to ask you to participate in what they're doing. And this is what they did. The 30 people in the class invited the rest of their colleagues of this 600-plus university. 160 students showed up in the evening, all with their cell phones. And they all assembled at one end of their new campus, which has this lovely watery path through it, about a quarter mile to the other side of the campus. And they had set up 7 beacons, like you see for the Hollywood movie, and the lights were off. So the students, one by one, filed with their lights held up to the sky and a drone camera filming them from down below. And they marched and then converged. So that sense of a smooth and then clumpy gathering. And at the first beacon, the light goes on, and they began to talk about the flaring forth of the universe. So at each of these 7 beacons, they focused on a particular moment of universe emergence, the journey of the universe, the new story perspective that Thomas was putting forward, and marking their campus in a kind of pilgrimage, if you will, and a pilgrimage of the cosmos. So it was a remarkable, very encouraging moment from young people in China.
We then went up to Beijing and had an event at the Yale Beijing Center, which is kind of a center for economic and political dialogue, the really important stuff. And we said, we were asked to do a showing of Journey of the Universe, and we've done showings in China, and we now have subtitles in Chinese. The book is in Chinese, was there at the event. All of the online courses that we have been transcribed into Chinese. There's a tremendous interest in China in the sense of how we belong to a vast unfolding universe. And again, I want to underscore, Teilhard and New Story is the full inspiration of Journey of the Universe. And the young people were riveted at this Duke event, as well as 160 of them, most of them under 35, just couldn't get enough of where do we belong? How do we fit in? What is our life work? So what we did was, in this legacy of Thomas Berry, the cosmology of evolution and ecology in the film, but integrated with the world's religions in the film. And we asked 3 leading Confucian scholars to come and speak about Confucianism and ecology. These young people were riveted because there's a huge revival of Confucianism in China. And just briefly, the trinity for Confucianism is cosmos, earth, and human. One dynamic, unfolding sensibility, the continuity of being, and that we are responsible for this continuity of being. That's a worldview of Confucianism. And the compatibility, as you can imagine, with Journey of the Universe is astonishing. 75,000 people were watching this live stream. This is Thomas's legacy. 70 years later, his journey to China to study their cosmology and then to integrate it with science cosmology. This is the great work still living. Thank you.
So we are going to take about 10 minutes of questions. And we have 2 microphones that are going to be roving about here. And John and Mary Evelyn will move down to the area in front of the main aisle here to receive your questions. So Sam has one and Ted has a microphone over here. So questions. Oh, such clarity in the presentation. Questions. I think we're all true believers, right?
Well, I have a question for you, Mary Evelyn.
Right here. There's one right there. Here we go. Here's the microphone. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, that was wonderful.
Identify yourself, please.
Oh, I'm Harvey Glover. I'm sort of related by marriage to them. And a Fordham student. Do you think that John would be devastated at what's going on today in just the few relatively short years since he died? How things really haven't gotten much better. What I find when you speak, it's wonderful because you're not doom and gloom, you're very positive. But how do you think he would feel? How do you think he would be if he was active and working and writing?
Thomas was described by many of us actually in this room as a prophet. They would use that term, and I think among the prophets you find some real anger, and Thomas would at times really flare forth at that distancing from the natural world, the inability to really combine social justice and eco-justice. But one point I would raise in terms of the great work is I can see Thomas leaning back with a laugh saying, "Tanta labora." And what's that, Thomas? He would say, you know, you ask me about the great work and the story, the cosmological story. A perfect example is Virgil's writing of the Aeneid. And he opens the Aeneid with that phrase, "Tanta labore deficat Roma est." It was such a labor to build Rome. The great work, Thomas also coined another phrase to address the point you're taking us towards, a moment of grace. Many people read that phrase as a rather beneficial kind of bouquet. It's a lovely sounding term. For Thomas, it was an expression of the tanta labora. It was a moment of grace, was a very challenging moment. You had to have all your wits and rise up to meet this moment of grace. And I think he would see us right now as deeply in a moment of grace.
Good.
He called himself a short-term pessimist, long-term optimist. This is why we're Teilhardians, aren't we? I went to Japan after Trinity and the uprisings of civil rights and the anti-Vietnam War and was totally burned out. We're in a similar period of burnout. But you know, going to the African American Museum this morning and you think of abolition, and you think of slavery, and you think of civil rights, and we are still working this out. And what people have suffered is mind-boggling. That museum is such a history book. And Thomas would say, I think, he would be amazed at China and the interest you see in this work in China. That's very uplifting. That we are always weaving between the dynamics of evolution, which are creative, ongoing, forward-moving, and entropy, which is backward, and so on. So I think the key offering that I think Thomas would give us, and I was just saying to Brian Brown, his equilibrium in not being understood in many contexts was remarkable, absolutely remarkable. But he exemplified, as some of you do in this room, what Teilhard would call the zest for life. The zest for life. And we went and visited the Zoological Museum where Teilhard was doing his work in exile from Europe. I left that place weeping, thinking of what Teilhard did to discover the fossil evidence for evolution. So struggle, suffering, joy, and zest. That's Thomas. That's the great work.
Let's see. Another question? Was it in the back? Microphone. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Joe Holland. I don't usually ask questions, but I've been haunted by something lately, so I'm breaking out of my introversion here. We recently had a conference that was heavily inspired by Thomas Berry, and we did some interviewing with leaders of major spirituality and sustainability organizations, and some of them by video conference. And one of the people we interviewed was Fletcher Harper. I don't know, he may be here, I don't know, the founder and director of Green Faith. And he said something that just struck me very hard, and I certainly don't know the answer to it, but I felt it should be raised here. He said, among a long list of about 30 or 40 things he said, very all important, one was, the Thomas Berry legacy cannot just be repeated over and over. Members in the network of the Thomas Berry legacy need to create intellectually a Thomas Berry version 2. And now I have to turn the page here. Thomas Berry version 2, and he continued. Also, the Berry movement needs a generational transition to a younger wave of leadership. That means finding scholars from different racial and religious traditions to look critically at the Berry legacy. Again, I don't know what to do with that question that Fletcher Harper raised, and I'm humbled before it, but I thought it should be placed as perhaps something for deliberation at this event. And thank you, both of you and all of you, for the extraordinary things you've already done for Thomas Berry.
Thank you, Joe.
It's interesting when you feel yourself a focus of critique that I think you're doing something right then. And in my engagement with Fletcher, we have occasion to talk now and again, and I think he sees that, I think Fletcher sees that there's opportunities, and all of us need to transition into that world where Greta Thunberg is coming from. And we have occasion to see some of them, especially of late, where young people are being given a voice at the table. And I think it's very important. I think that's part of where Fletcher is coming from also.
It's great to have critique. It's great to say we need legacy. Of course we do. Absolutely. That's why we've been teaching for 50 years. That's why we have some of the finest students on the planet at Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, and they are doing amazing things, and they inspire us. We like to say we have an intergenerational handshake, and I can also tell you that we need activism, and we need these things on the ground, but we also need long-term spiritual strength to do this work. Otherwise, there's burnout. And burnout is all around us. We have had students in our office reading passages of Journey of the Universe, weeping and saying, we know we can go on, because their sense of despair and disempowerment is so huge. So our work is precisely in this space of an intergenerational handshake. Greta Thunberg, the climate strikes, Sunrise Movement, Extinction Rebellion, it's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And just one other thing, the diversity of this movement that we all are concerned about In the interviews that I did, 20 with scientists and 20 with environmentalists as part of the Journey of the Universe, are completely dealing with African Americans who say this story matters to them. 2 Native Americans saying this story matters to them. Paula Gonzalez from the Hispanic tradition saying why it matters to her. People from the international community. Diversity is throughout this effort. It's an offering. It's imperfect. It's having traction. It needs further work. There's no question. So we welcome the point, and we hope that you will help with these kinds of issues.
Yeah, and just to put a tail on the donkey too, I'm thinking like a Thomas Berry Forum at Iona University. That's an example, I think, of Thomas Berry too. Yeah. I mean, they are happening there, not just Tucker Grimm, you know, it's happening a lot of places.
So maybe we should go on with the program. You were going to...
Yeah. So, now we are going to have some responses from some really special and extraordinary people. I'm just going to briefly introduce them as they come up, because there are longer biographies online. But I want to say Steve Dunn, a Passionist, a PhD, who founded at the University of Toronto the Elliott Allen Center for Theology and Ecology, one of the very first centers of its kind. And he, too, helped educate many PhDs, including Heather Eaton and some others here and elsewhere. But Steve, knowing Thomas, maybe the oldest at this particular conference, had such respect and reverence and support for him. He brought him up to Port Burwell for decades, more than 20 years each summer, where Thomas would speak. Thomas is well known in Canada because of the work of Steve Dunn and his students. He did an extraordinary CBC program with Thomas, and we are so grateful to Steve Dunn for what he has done, for the legacy of Thomas Berry. Please join me in welcoming Steve.
She said I was probably the oldest. I was going to tell you a joke about Tom, but I'm under time constraints, so I wrote a text. I first encountered Thomas when I joined the Passionist community as a postulant at a very impressionable age. He was controversial. He seemed unusually smart. It was quite captivating for a young postulant. Through the years, I subliminally expected him to offer compelling insight into the theological heart of being a Passionist, what nowadays we especially like to call our charism. This is a brief account of how I feel he did not disappoint. Many people felt he sidestepped discussing suffering. That impression, I would contend, misses his lifelong preoccupation with pain, the pain arising from what we label the human condition. He was actually offended by what he called a deep, hidden rage in the Western soul against the human condition. Because of that, we live within a cultural pathology that seeks to avoid those sufferings, whether by inventions, therapies, prayers, or now particularly technological hubris. As a cultural historian, he explored this theme in the varied religions in the world without privileging Christianity. But as his historical horizon expanded to the cosmological, his focus turned to the human as a species, always in the context of the universe story of cosmogenesis, much to the disappointment of those narrowly concerned with individual salvation. Few people have lived within that intellectual horizon as thoroughly and articulately as Thomas. In 1994, he countered the traditional, if sophisticated, interpretation of the theology of the cross of French Passionist Stanislas Breton, a very distinguished man. Asserting that the human is a species born in violence, he noted that without the supernova explosion that produced our solar system, our very existence and spirituality are unthinkable. Yet that violence was the precondition for our amazing role as the universe reflecting upon itself. The explosion of the first generation star, he suggested, could be seen as a sacrifice and a cosmological moment of grace. His strongest assertion, though, was his insistence that the wisdom of the cross and the wisdom of the universe are two aspects of a single wisdom, integral parts of a single story. Neither is complete without the other. As for sound bites, he offered phrases such as, "The foolishness of the cross can be matched by the foolishness of creation. Neither is within human comprehension. And redemptive wisdom cannot be alien from creative wisdom. There has been no mistake. Also, the sacrificial dimension is a scandal in both instances." At an earlier time, Stanislas Breton had described three icons of response to the crucified one. They overlap, of course, and coexist. None is confined to any one historical period, but each has had an era of dominance in the life of piety. First, the contemplative Stabat Mater, with the hallmark of compassionate accompaniment. Second, the suffering servant, the justice-restoring prophet. The third, he identifies as fools of the cross, using St. Paul's remark, the message, that is, the logos, of the cross is foolishness. Rather than foolishness, however, for Breton, the cross gives those Christian mystics the freedom of judgment to inspire unique, even scandalous, spiritual creativity for their time. Paradoxically, this demonstrates the power of the cross. I find that, ironically, Breton's three icons give us a hint of how Thomas' wisdom of the cross is beginning to arise in contemporary thought and piety. First, consider how in Laudato Si, the compassion characteristic of the Stabat Mater is evidenced in Pope Francis' turn toward compassion for the earth. We can feel the desertification of the soil almost as a personal physical ailment, he wrote. Second, we continue to be inspired by the decades-old praise of Thomas Berry as a prophet crying for the wilderness. That prophetic message is now carried forward, as was just mentioned, even by children such as Greta Thunberg and her companions across the globe on strike for the planet. But I think the third icon best reflects Thomas' originality. Rather than fools of the cross, perhaps we could call them earthling mystics of the cross. Their response is a shock to both society and spirituality. They have discovered the truth of Thomas's teaching. Subjective communion with the earth provides the context in which we now make our spiritual journey. The real foolishness destroying the earth community is revealed to be society's common sense about avoiding the pain of the human condition. Thomas presciently suggested in 1994, we are now entering a new period in the religious cultural history of our Christian-derived civilization. Coming generations will need something beyond a sacred book that teaches the spiritual wisdom of the cross. They will need the additional wisdom of the sacred universe. The three icons of response to the crucified one, compassionate earth healing, sacrificial earth advocacy, and above all, falling in love with the numinous wonder of earthly existence, mark the present and future path in this new period of our Christian-inspired civilization. They prepare for moments of grace within and beyond the ecological crisis. Thomas concluded, we might consider that we are just now at a moment when the wisdom of the cross can arrive at a more expanded expression of itself, and now more than ever be our secure guide into the future. As with many other institutes, Passionists today are developing the narrative of the spiritual family. It appropriately acknowledges the validity and vitality of a charism without borders. With this in mind, I have three hopes. First, for continued study of Thomas's interpretation of that charism. Second, that these Passionists without borders will become sacrificial co-creators of a new earth. And third, using Thomas's own famous icon of medieval cathedral builders, they will work modestly alongside the other stonecutters, joining in the great work of building a reinvented human species, ecologically fit for ecozoic living. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. Inspiring words indeed. And now we're so pleased to welcome Sister Kathleen Degnan, a dear friend from our graduate days at Fordham together, along with Brian Brown, the next speaker. Kathleen has been one of the leaders in so many areas of spirituality, of ecology, of justice, and her founding Thomas Berry Forum of Ecological Dialogue, along with Brian Brown and Kevin Cawley and Danny Martin is going to receive the Thomas Berry Award on November 9th in just a very short period of time for their amazing work. You'll be also happy to know we just celebrated an amazing occasion at Iona College where she teaches of a new center, the Degnan Institute for Earth and Spirit at Iona. Please join me in welcoming Kathleen.
We are here this day through the strength of heaven, light of sun, radiance of moon, splendor of fire, speed and power of lightning, swiftness of wind, depth of the sea, stability of earth, firmness of rock. Amen. Well, it is an absolute joy to be here during the 10th anniversary of the passing on, the passing deeper and wider, the passing into us of our esteemed teacher, Father Thomas Berry. Special thanks to John Borelli and to the organizers of this conference, who offer us a chance to celebrate another great work of the extraordinary team, Doctors Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm. Now in collaboration with Andrew Anyal, the publication of the much anticipated biography of Thomas Berry. I would not be on this stage were it not for the counsel and affection of Mary Evelyn Tucker, who bid me to stay in my first class with Thomas as I suffered the intellectual tension of incomprehension and mental bewilderment all those years ago at Fordham University. My first Berry course, The Great Mother. Stay, Kathleen, she said. Keep moving with him, moving and moving into greater realms of insight. Stay. And so I did, and so I'm here. And now on, I continue to wonder at the Tucker-Grimm union, whose beginnings I had the delight to witness. Is it 4 decades ago? I continue to marvel at what their synergy has created for all of us, for everyone, forever. Worlds of thought, places and spaces for the development of thought within the great wisdom traditions of this world. And I continue to be especially grateful for their curation of the legacy of Thomas, their intellectual mentor and their spiritual father. How their lives honor his, the body of their great work, magnifying his own and ensuring its perdurance and accessibility to generations to come who will, no doubt, have greater need of Thomas's wisdom and guidance than even we. And so we thank them for the biography of Thomas Berry, which they and Andrew have given us. It's a beautiful book. It's an important book. It's a necessary book. The beauty of this book is more than what is conveyed in the comprehensive summary of the good news about Thomas. The beauty of this book is that it conveys Thomas, his presence, his wisdom, his beloved gracious self. This is a beautiful book because it mediates Berry's own beautiful voice speaking to us, perhaps, as Mary Evelyn has noted for the first time, from the depths of Goldenrod, his unpublished late-life memoir, which sounds through this biography as autobiography, as confessions, as his own authentic testament. The biography of Thomas Berry is also an important book because it gives us the richly layered historical context for the life of a great historian who sought through the arcs of unfolding eras a grand epic, a great unifying vision, a story of everything. And as we know for Thomas, it was story all the way down. The cosmic venture, the human venture, the earth venture, my venture, your venture, his venture, his story. And now we have it, Thomas's great story. But more than beautiful and important, this biography is necessary because now Berry can be more fully and personally encountered as the man, the person, the friend who possessed the mind that continues to quicken ours, the sensitive soul who left us words that cast the spell that awakened and awakens us. This biography is important because it's an invitation to intimacy with the master who no longer stands before us and who, going forward, will be unmet by generations to come, but for these touchstones. Finally, this book is important to me because it is the next contribution to the birthing of what I love to call the Berry School of Ecozoic Wisdom, an intellectual and spiritual schola maturing and developing alongside other great schools of thought within the great academic and cultural traditions of history. More than a great mind, Berry was and remains a great wisdom master who followed in the steps of his own master Aquinas in his desire to offer a dark age, an illuminating synthesis, an integral vision, a compendium of salvific knowledge to guide the cosmotheandric enterprise toward a new horizon. In this, Thomas was and remains, for me, the archetypal teacher, the master and mentor, known briefly and then forever. He was and remains my university, the continuation of my higher education, whose teaching I continue passing on, as do you, Mary Evelyn and John, to my students, in hopes that they will pass it on to their students, their children, their worlds, lineages and legacies, legacies and lineages. This is the soul of the Berry School. Perhaps like many of you, my gratitude to Thomas is deed, to create places and spaces where he can yet be met, where he can do the one thing he always wanted to do, to teach. And so the living memorial, the week of his death, and so the living memorial, my wonderful friends and colleagues inaugurated on the week of his death, the Thomas Berry Forum for Ecological Dialogue, is such a deed of love and gratitude. And now, a decade on, the Institute for Earth and Spirit, where Thomas's vision is a pedagogical field unfolding, each project a living learning opportunity in which to encounter the teacher. Perhaps an evocation of Berry's Riverdale Center for Religious Research in a new key, a new place, perhaps something different and new. So it is my true wish on this celebratory evening to see the multiplication of such initiatives for ecozoic inquiry in the lineage of Thomas. And who but those of us here assembled are better positioned to ensure the diversification and continuation of such endeavors. And have we not been endowed with all we need for such a great work to corporately, virtually, or actually build the Berry School of Ecozoic Wisdom? Have we not been so endowed by our beloved friends and colleagues, John and Mary Evelyn? In fact, they have already created its global, multilingual, multimedia inscape and outreach in film, academic curricula, symposia, scholastic mentoring, and in a host of ongoing projects that permit Thomas to keep doing what he dearly desired to do, to teach. So 1 decade after his passing into his virtual school, we find ourselves at one of its convocations, gathered here now, his students, old and new. This is what I celebrate on this 10th anniversary of Thomas's augmentation, that we have become his school of thought, his school of action. And my wish is that we consciously and committedly take up the mantle and the mandate to continue his teaching, offering that salvific vision, the real possibility of the ecozoic to generations not yet born, but anticipated by our labors, by our great work to foster the Thomas Berry School of Ecozoic Wisdom.
Thank you, dear friend, dear sister. And now I welcome a brother, Brian Brown, who did the most remarkable dissertation at Fordham with Thomas Berry. And Thomas said it was his finest of the 20-some that he directed. It was on the Buddha nature, the womb of reality, of all reality. And Brian took up some of the most difficult texts of the Buddhist tradition, from India to China. And one of the great Buddhist scholars at Columbia also found his work, his book, astounding. There's a brilliance in Brian Brown. He graduated first in his class at Fordham. But his other talent, he got a law degree from NYU, and he was one of the first people to help Thomas with this notion of earth jurisprudence at a conference that he and John went to down in Virginia, when these ideas of we need an earth jurisprudence for the earth community were just emerging. And if that isn't Thomas Berry too, I don't know what it is, because Thomas was calling for the rights of nature. But Brian Brown, with his extraordinary philosophical sensibilities, has done, among many articles, but one I really recommend to you, called The Foundations of an Earth Jurisprudence, the law's revelation from order to justice. It's in the book, Living Cosmology. At that conference at Yale, he got a standing ovation for that talk. Please join me in welcoming Brian Brown.
Mary Evelyn and John graciously invited me here this evening to share the lines which I had originally penned 41 years ago this December, on the eve of my departure from the Riverdale Center for Religious Research, where I had spent the last year, along with John and Valerio Ortolani, working on our respective doctoral dissertations under the direction of Thomas Berry. It had been a privileged experience, and on that night, a moment of the deepest poignancy marked its passing. Inescapably, that December night, I was grieved by departure's finality, and the impossibility of expressing my gratitude for this extraordinary thinker who had immeasurably expanded my intellectual and spiritual horizons since my first graced encounter with him as an undergraduate at Fordham 8 years earlier. His stature as a scholar and educator was complemented by the abundant warmth of his hospitality, his unstinting generosity of time and interest, not just in me, but in the all and the many whom he welcomed into the Riverdale Center by the Hudson that I was then leaving. The lines which eventually emerged for that farewell gathering of friends, and which I here recall, gave expression to the wisdom of its ground floor texts. Thomas Berry's profound and creative engagement with their learning, and his passionate, enduring concern for Earth's gravity and marvel beyond all their conception. O watchman, what of the night? Unfinished thesis, finished for the night, I wander downstairs in this house that has been my home. I have known its silence before in a year of nights, and have haunted its rooms often at this hour of favored quiet. But tonight, like an improper Buddhist, I stand warmed by the memories of enchanted months, shamelessly, flagrantly moved by their passing. The red-tiled entrance, lit for the night, reflects now the images of how many departures for the Seychelles and Los Angeles, for Toronto and Louisville, for Washington and Greensboro, Detroit and San Francisco. What enthusiastic journeyings of happy goodbyes. The casual corduroy prophet of earth's wisdom and heaven's goodness, of passports forgotten, of a bag with only books, of detachment's mirth at the prospect of the challenge and the relish of the audacious phrase. To the left, in the great dark wooded room, the Chinese and Christian fathers sit in their shelves of green and purple, exchanging the muted silence of their common mystery. A paneled hugeness, it is empty now of its Maytime volumes, the scattered lore of a universe piled deep and wide across its table, awaiting the magic distillation that would become June's conference. And its ceilinged solemnity still pales at the revered Benedictine of a summer's eve, impervious to the gentle demands of an immense magnitude, the spirituality of starry energies, eclipsing the shameful boundaries of so impoverished a monasticism. A few steps beyond, and China and Japan expansively lie before me, along their wall of moonlight, while the Hindus and Buddhists are patient in an appropriate modesty, sharing shadowy space with myths and symbols, Dante and Blake. It is a room of rare texts and of Britannic knowledge. Yet somehow, only the antechamber, the passageway to the site of my most attentive scholarship, my most frequent inspiration, my warmest and most constant laughter. Multi-glassed prism reflecting onto rock and river, I have known such a gladness in you that will warm me in my going and lure me to my return. I have sat at your table of frequent polishings and only reticent shines, through lunches and dinners of quartets and sonatas, concertos and symphonies, hearing beyond these only partial strains the song of the spheres, the wondrous movements of time's transformations, through the voice of earth's sage, my spirit's father, my heart's friend. Greenhouse porch of my imagination's growth, I have sat dumbly for a year, like one of your potted plants, content merely to listen with geologians and bishops, technicians and planners, contemplatives and artists, engineers and scientists, dearest friends and fellow students. Content to root in my mind's soil the vision and the challenge, the perspective and the approach, to be schooled in the responsibility and energized by the tireless dedication. Though you have been a room of the most sublime idea and critical thought, of the most sober evaluation and urgent quest, I shall stand in the breeze of the Caribbean night, still smiling with the constant laughter of your year's grace. The sky is pale with moon and stars, and as I turn to go, instinctively I hear the question of night's sentinel, holding its branches protectively for this house that has been my home. A question posed nightly as I stood for a year and shared its rooted stillness before sleep. O watchman, what of the night? A time of memories and their tears, of ideals and enthusiasms, of deepest admiration and warmest gratitude, of affectionate welcomes and happy goodbyes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Brian. That was just beautiful and a wonderful meditation to conclude this session. And thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Kathleen.